So hi everyone, I'm very grateful for the opportunity I have to talk today. I'm a PhD student at Harvard University and Fondazione Munmach here in Trentino, and also member of the LDLCIE. This talk is about the ongoing continental scale range expansion of golden jackal in Europe. So first of all, for some of you, this may come as a surprise that there are golden jackal in Europe because they tend to be associated with African savanna, but they are really real. And this triggers many questions. Where are they coming from? Why are they spreading? Where are they going to go next? And what could they be bringing along with them? So the map of jackals of the world used to be like this until a couple of years ago. There were 3 species of jackal. The golden jackal in red was distributed from Southeast Asia to Europe and a good third of Africa. And there were also 2 other strictly African jackal species. However, since 2015, we know that the previously thought golden jackals of Africa are actually a separate lineage that is more closely related to the wolf and has been named the African golden wolf. From now onwards, the golden jackal Canis aureus is strictly Eurasian, and we're going to dig into the European part of its range and ecology. An overview of the species ecology, it's a mesocarnivore. It weighs about 10 kilograms. Its social organization is a family group centered around a reproductive pair. The home range size is estimated to be about 5 to 15 square kilometers, and its diet vary widely, however, mostly constituted of small mammals, carcasses, fruits, but occasionally larger prey. What characterizes jackals in Europe is its range expansion. I'm going to give you a little bit of a historical review and a survey of the current state of the distribution. So jackals colonized Europe presumably in the early Holocene, most likely from Caucasus, and we have early records which date about 8,000 years ago in Croatia and in some caves of Greece. For the major part of their history, they were limited to coastal areas. By the 16th century, they were also present in some areas of Bulgaria and the plain of today Sofia. There were also some records in Greece, but more marginal and in some islands. In the 19th century, the species undergone a wide expansion, and by the 50s and 70s, it reached wider areas of Greece, of Bulgaria, but most importantly, the Pannonian region, so Hungary, eastern Croatia. In the 80s and 90s, there was a decline in some Eastern European countries, especially also in Greece, following systematic persecution. But now we see a rebounding of the distribution. I'm going to tell you now a little bit more about the current distribution, which is based on an ongoing work as part of the LCIE scope. I won't dig into the details because Petra has done that work very nicely earlier. But just to reaffirm that this is a preliminary work, and unlike the other carnivores, this is the first mapping attempt for jackal. So we added one category for golden jackal simply because the state of knowledge of the species is not quite well as advanced as for the other carnivores. So the permanent presence of the species is mainly found from basically Bulgaria to Hungary, Serbia, and Croatia, and is shown in orange on the map. In green are areas of sporadic presence. In the case of jackals, those largely indicate newly colonized areas. I have to say here that for Romania, it's slightly an artifact of the data because we lack some information about intermediary years, but we're working on filling this gap. In terms of expert-based information, you can see that our intuition, which is based largely on expert knowledge of habitat suitability, feels a big part of the Peloponnese in southern Greece and also in Ukraine. Very interestingly, since 2011, we have a very separate nucleus of presence in the Baltic state, especially in Estonia, with permanent presence and also some sporadic areas, and to a lower extent in Lithuania and marginal records in Latvia, and marginal records in Lithuania. We are working on defining populations, which is quite challenging for jackals, given how given their movement abilities. However, we come to a partial agreement on 5 distinct populations in Europe. The Samos Island in Greece, which is the smallest of all population in terms of area, which is collected to the Turkish population with probably a very low gene flow in the recent years. The Peloponnese population, so the peninsula in southern Greece, the Baltic states, obviously, which are quite separated from the other populations, and the 2 largest populations, the Adriatic, which starts in northwest Greece to end in Italy along the Adriatic coast, and the largest of them all, the one that is expanding the most rapidly, is the Pannonian Balkan. The boundary of the Pannonian Balkan population to the north is becoming fuzzier year after year, very difficult to track, and so is the boundary between the Adriatic and the Pannonian Balkan populations, because in the last years we have Jackal groups establishing into this border area. This definition of populations was largely based on geographic definitions, but it does align with some genetic investigations on jackals, and especially this study published by Rutkowski et al. In 2015, which looked at the genetic makeup on some of the European populations, actually all of them except the Adriatic one, and as well as the Caucasus population. What you can see is the Samos Island is very distinct from the others, and this is because they have a very different origin. The very interesting point of this study is to show that the Baltic individuals are very related to the Caucasus animals. In other words, the most likely scenario for the expansion of the species in the Baltics are animals that disperse from Armenia, Russia, Georgia region by northern Ukraine. We also have other analyses that show that the Adriatic population and the Pannonian Balkan population have a slightly different genetic makeup. In any case, this suggests that the history of jackals in Europe is a successive colonization events by a few animals coming from the Caucasus. When we go to population sizes, we estimate that there are more than 105,000 jackals in Europe, which makes them very abundant. More than half of them are in Bulgaria. But strongholds occur in Serbia, in Hungary, in Romania, Croatia, but to a lower extent in Greece, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Slovenia. They are developing ages at the moment. There are noticeably 11 family groups out of 2016 in Estonia, 1 reproductive group in Czech Republic as of last year, more than 3 groups in Austria, and the Italian population is estimated between 3 and 9 and is quite variable in space and time. Besides the populations, and this is what makes the news of jackals every week, I would say, are the occurrence of dispersers all throughout the continent. They arrived to Switzerland in 2011, to Denmark 2015, the Netherlands 2016, France 2017, and we are waiting the first records for Belgium, Luxembourg, basically any month from now. Some of them come from the Caucasus that we know from genetic analysis, especially in northern Ukraine, but we believe that the majority of them are coming from the Pannonian Balkan population. Now I would like to give you a little bit of an idea of how fast they are moving. I heard earlier that wolf was the most dynamic large carnivore. I might suggest that might not be true. Jackals are very fast. So this is where jackals were shot in Hungary in 2013, and this is where they were shot in 2016. Right, so it's a plus 57% increase in just 3 years. Of course, those are hunting packs, so we don't know the real distribution underlying this, but it's a good indicator, nevertheless. And what is in space follows in numbers. Those are the annual hunting bags for Hungary since 1994. I would argue that's a very steep increase, especially starting 2010. And as you can see, black circled are 2013, 2016 data. We are literally rising quickly these days. So an interesting ecological question is what could have led the species that was restricted in a small range for 7,000 years or so, all of a sudden to get out of that place and start colonizing Europe. We lack a lot of studies on jackal, that is a common pattern, but we do have an accumulating evidence suggesting that this might have been the result of the fragmentation and persecution of otherwise continuous wolf populations in southeastern Europe. This phenomenon is very known in ecological systems. It's called the mesopredator release. in which a large predator decrease in abundance favor the expansion of a smaller carnivore. When we go and try to model is a big word, but at least depict the relative abundance of those two species in Central and Eastern Europe in time, we see very negatively correlated trends. In addition of this, we have negative correlation in their distribution ranges, but I would say that the bulk of the evidence is actually coming from local evidence of golden jackal family groups disappearing following wolf colonization. And this happened in several countries. It happened in Italy not long ago. It happened in Bosnia. It happened in Slovenia, in Greece, in Turkey. So those are important evidence. However, I would suggest that they are reinforcing factors. Wolves might have been a trigger, but they are factors that definitely have fueled this process. The changes in attitude and legal status, moving from widespread persecution to regularized hunting, the end of bounties and rewards, and most importantly, I would say, the end of systematic poisoning campaigns have played a role. Also, the fragmentation of otherwise continuous forests might have created suitable habitats for jackal. But it's really, I think, we have to dig into the synergy of those factors to really understand the scale of this phenomenon. One question we always get is, where are they going to go next? Are there any limits to this expansion? Well, first of all, let's have a look at the habitat plasticity of the species. The wolf is always said to be a plastic animal. Well, jackal is also. On those 4 pictures are 4 different territorial groups of jackals. And as you can see, those are very different environments. However, behind those plasticity, we see some general patterns emerging. But to put them into light, we have to go and do some habitat selection analysis. And we try to assess which factors influence golden jackal presence, which areas could be suitable for the species in the future. To do this, we have done what is called species distribution modeling, which is just a statistical method to relate the probability of presence of the golden jackal to a series of environmental factors. In other words, relating where jackals are or aren't with the local conditions. We have recorded jackal presence using what we believe is the best method to sample these species on large spatiotemporal scales, which is howling survey, where we simply go out there in the night and broadcast jackal howling using a strict protocol and register presence. I have to say at this point that this was a complete voluntary work. It's relying on a network of a lot of people. There is no budget line for this work, so we are very grateful for all of their work and time in the field, because we managed to collect more than 9,000 howling stations in Europe. Out of those, about 1,500 were presence of territorial groups, showed here on the map, distributed in 11 countries. I'd like to show you a couple of results. Those plots are all structured in the same way. On the y-axis, you have the probability of presence that is varying as a function of a predictor, of an environmental factor. So in this case, you can see that the probability presence of a jackal shows a pretty negatively correlated trend with the increase in number of days with local snow cover. I'm sorry, there are confidence intervals on the original plots, but they aren't here. We also looked at wolf presence. So to do this, we used the data of the LCIE in 2012, and we're looking forward to use the new data. We use different categories, but here for sake of simplicity, I'll show you just 2. Absence of wolf and core of the permanent areas, which means permanent areas of wolves, but not exactly on the margin. You can see that there is a pretty striking effect, and those were constraining the other factors. In other words, these are explained by wolf, but not by other environmental factors. We also underline that jackals are mosaic species. They favor intermediate agriculture percentage cover, which make many areas suitable for the species. And the fact that it's been known for long that jackals favor water bodies. They love rivers, they love wetlands and surroundings of lakes. This might be because of habitat selection, but it can also be because this is where they settle first. When we want to predict, we apply this model to Europe, and the warmer colors here indicate higher probability of presence, which high pockets in Western Europe, Italy, France, and Iberia. I would say that the colonization of the Baltics is quite problematic for this model, but we have to work and solve this issue. Predictions have to be taken cautiously. One of the main reasons for that is that we did not take anthropogenetic food availability, and these effects the distribution, local densities and settlements of jackals because they use largely waste dump and remains of game and livestock. Another factor that is not taken into account is dispersal ability of the species. However, I would argue this is unlikely to be any limiting factor for the species because it's a great disperser in a human-dominated landscape. Here's a case we analyzed with Hungarian colleagues of a golden jackal colored, one of the first in Europe 2 years ago. And as you can see, the capture site was the white triangle. Close to her natal arm range, she went into pretty important dispersal excursion after leaving for good and settling on the shores of Lake Balaton. It was a very quick dispersal. She crossed many times highways, very important roads, went into surroundings of villages and cities. This is no problem for jackal. So what could they bring along with them? An obvious, simple, trivial answer is that a new species will mean new interactions. It will modify the trophic webs. This is undeniable. But one topic of attention is the likely competition with red fox. Those two species overlap in diet in areas more seriously than others, and this is especially the case where golden jackal focus on small mammals. Could they have any impact on game species? I'm sorry, but we're lacking data on these species once again. However, what we know is that the dramatic increase of golden jackal in some areas wasn't followed by a simultaneous drop into the game species, but further research is definitely needed. Impacts on livestock, I'm going to be disappointing again. We lack systematic reporting in most of the core countries for golden jackal, simply because the damages aren't refunded. There is a lack of technical abilities to assess golden jackal damages. We have a good knowledge of how lynx damages look like, brown bear damages look like. Jackal is a little bit more confusing. In terms of general trends, however, there are things that emerge. They do attack occasionally sheep and goats primarily, but we believe that those damages are rather limited compared to other carnivores in some local cases. But two examples for 2016, robust example, I would say. For Slovenia, 46 sheep, 6 chicken, and 4 cattle calves were claimed. The calves may be dubious records, potentially. It was consumption post-mortem. We have to get into the details of this topic. In Estonia, 110 sheep and 1 cattle, also a calf. In this case, those occurred in places where jackals were not before, and so there is no experience, and so we're just experimenting the first years of presence. Jackals, however, provide ecosystem services, and that's something we should not forget. They do consume a lot of slaughter remains and of carcasses that are otherwise left to rot in nature. So they consume about 3,500 tons estimated in Serbia, which was valued to about €500,000, and this estimated about 9,000 tons in Europe, and this is obviously on the rise. What's the status of this species? A question we get in every colonized country is golden jackal an alien species and an invasive species? For this, I'd just like to define you what is an alien species. Well, it has been introduced by humans outside its natural distribution. And only an alien species can become invasive, depending on the likely damage to economics or biodiversity. Jackals are spreading on their own legs, which means they cannot classify as alien and therefore cannot classify as invasive. They are listed as a species of community interest in the Habitats Directive. It's the Annex 5, which means that lethal control is allowed should the favorable conservation status be maintained and monitored, implemented. At the national level, it's very variable. It's largely protected on the distribution edge, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, and Poland, for instance. It's unprotected in some countries, Greece, which is quite strange given that the species went under a bit of a decrease in the 90s, and also in Czech Republic, and is hunted in most of the core countries. Mortality factors. Well, jackal, first of all, is an amazingly successful species in our Anthropocene, but there are factors that need to be mentioned. The legal culling of the species can be really important proportion of the population in some of the countries. I'm thinking especially in the core of the distribution. Illegal killing is definitely still happening. Traffic accidents are important, especially on the edges, and I'm thinking here about Italy. and in Greece, for which it's most likely the most serious factor, as well as erroneous shootings, basically red fox hunters that mistake jackal for red fox. The future threats, well, they are definitely increasing conflicts with hunters and livestock owners due to either perceived or real impacts, and I would argue that the lack of research on jackal does nothing to help. And changes in resource availability. Regulations will get tighter in some of the countries around waste dump and management of carcasses, and that will reduce locally the availability of food for jackals. And finally, research priorities. There is no point in talking about knowledge gap for golden jackal because golden jackal is a knowledge gap. However, there are some critical places that we need to work rapidly. Dispersal patterns, space use of the animal and the trophic interactions with other canids. And for management, there is a critical need for assessing the effectiveness of howling survey as a monitoring method, and the impacts on livestock and game species. It goes without saying that it's a priority. But as well as hybridization with domestic dogs, we already have cases. How prevalent are they? Open question. And disease transmission, that was a very relevant question earlier today. Jackal are very long distance dispersers. They're coming from Southeastern Europe. And so we are interested in disease transmission, definitely. With this, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all of the people who are contributed to this research. There are many of them are in the audience. It's really a collaborative work, as I was saying earlier. I would like to thank also the wildlife photographers who allowed to illustrate this presentation. And I'll thank you for your attention. I'm ready to take any questions.
Questions to this last two presentations, and then or on any of the presentation you heard today.
Thank you for the great presentation. We actually see golden jackals almost frequently on our trips through Europe already. Just 2 weeks ago, right in Austria, outside of my hometown, there was a golden jackal. Mm-hmm. I think we have to be careful that we recognize the interaction between these species. Because as we know from our partner, our wilderness partner in Hungary, there the golden jackal currently is the top predator. In the Hortobágy National Park, he actually does already kill the young wild horses. So it has the potential, and now the Hungarians are glad if the wolf is coming back, the wolf that they exterminated. So these interactions in the ecosystem are so important because, as you know, Hungary now raised the shooting quota to 7,500 jackals for 2018. And we again make the mistake by intervening selectively without really recognizing how the ecosystem as a whole may come unbalanced or come into balance because we react very fast to it. But I perfectly agree that the impact on the shepherds is most likely by the jackal going to be larger than by the wolves in some areas. But as we also see where the wolf is, there's almost no jackal. They literally control them very, very effectively.
Well, I can only concur with your statement. For sure, the interactions of such a prevalent species that comes in high abundance and high density is raising a lot of ecological questions, management related, and the management of golden jackal is really getting ahead of any kind of research. We're doing a little bit what we can to keep track, but jackals are advancing fast and quickly and faster than funding.
I have a question for John. So you started your talk by asking the question, when is it acceptable to kill a large carnivore, and you ended up with thoughts on democracy and how do we manage our political system. And I think that's very interesting. Still, there is one point of view that may be missing, and I would like to have your opinion whether we should or whether actually it's a legitimate question to consider that point of view. Another title of your talk could have been, do we ask the wolves when they want to be killed? And if you look at democracy, it's only democracy between humans. And as a human being, I have natural, inalienable rights that even if people vote to take those rights away, they can't. Do you consider that wolves have rights to live in urban landscape, even if we don't want them? So the fact that we don't want to give them rights, does it mean they don't have rights? Or whatever we think, do they have rights? And I know you are not going to give an answer because you will tell there are many values, but at least do you consider this question is worth being asked?
Well, I think that actually is becoming an increasingly important question, because for the last maybe 15 years we have been sucked into this ecosystem services debate, right, where everyone is trying to say, well, we can serve nature because it gives us human benefits. So it's getting more and more human-centered, which means it's really more important than ever to address these type of questions of, well, how do we deal with intrinsic value, or the intrinsic rights of animals or nature or communities or ecosystems unto exist. So certainly I would say these are really, really important questions. You'll probably get a totally different answer from everybody who actually asks here, because it gets very kind of controversial, especially when you get into the details of how you actually want to draw the lines. But just to maybe stick out my neck a little bit here, even humans have to follow certain limits in terms of what human behavior is allowed, right? So your interactions with your fellow humans and society is actually regulated, in which there are actually potential penalties in there. And so some of the kind of philosophers who discuss this type of thing about intrinsic value also get into the issue, well, where do we draw the lines? And do wildlife, if they have rights, then do they also actually have responsibilities? Or do they only get the rights without the responsibilities? So this opens up for a never-endless philosophical debate, which is really kind of fascinating, and I think probably quite important to actually hold. So, like you say, I can't answer this, but these are certainly important questions. But ultimately, it will be people who will decide to what extent we do convey rights onto animals. Maybe that isn't the way it should be, but that simply is how it is.
Well, I would like to ask to Mr. Ranc, how did you track the golden jackal in your study?
Do you mean the study in Hungary?
Yes.
Oh, it's GPS colored.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You mentioned that the hybridization between jackal, golden jackal, and dogs were discovered, and this is a common issue, or just very, very uncommon, very rare?
Well, difficult question. We have some cases suddenly popping up in Croatia at the moment, and they were, I guess, more regular findings in Israel. Although Israel is, in terms of canid genetics, is a very complicated topic, because their jackals, golden jackals, do hybridize not only with dogs, but also potentially with wolf, and also potentially with African golden wolf, making a huge melting pot. For Croatia, there were, if I recall, 3 animals, but then the extent on how many of the shot jackals they did actually investigate, I think it's a bit early. But there are definitely a lot of people that are paying attention right now, I think in Romania, in Hungary, and in Serbia.
And may I add the next question? So you mentioned that you find some, during your studies, that in our areas with the bigger density of wolves, the golden jackals, that evidences of golden jackals were more rare. So if there is any possibility that creating zones, such as artificial zones without wolves, can create some space for golden jackals?
Well, I think, quite frankly, I think the spaces are plentiful, with or without wolf exclusion zones. But however, for sure, I mean, if wolf is a constraining factor, wherever wolves is not, there is a higher likelihood for higher densities of golden jackal. But for sure, in the expansion of the pattern, one of the unknown is how is the wolf expansion pattern is going to react. And I would actually say that a lot of the knowledge about the wolf jackal relationship is waiting jackals to arrive to Germany and Poland, because only there we will be able to tease apart in a very structured and rigorous manner the effect of land use from the effect of wolf presence, because they will be both in relatively low land areas that are potentially suitable for both species. So we are looking forward. Let's put it this way.
Just to ask if there are evidence of also golden jackal expansion, if you know, in Middle East or in Asia, because they have such a big range, and especially in the Caucasus, because if the origin of the Baltic population probably are Caucasus animals, they are also showing some expansion in Caucasus.
First of all, I take advantage of your question because it's a good catch. I forgot to say on the map that we did not look into Moldova, and we did not look into the European part of Turkey. That is very important because we know they are full of jackals in the European part of Turkey. From what I know from Turkey, first of all, there is an ongoing expansion of jackals. They are reporting jackals at increasingly higher elevations along rivers and increasingly in the center of the country. For the Middle East per se, my knowledge is a little bit more fragmented. I would say that in Russia, from my understanding, is that there is also an expansion going on. However, we do lack contacts with Russian colleagues, and a lot of the records in Eastern Europe come from the news, and just the language barrier makes it actually quite complicated. But certainly.
To the question about the interaction between wolf and the jackals, we do have some indications. As you know, in Romania, with a large wolf population, from the Ministry of Environment, when we met them, the jackal population did not increase as fast as it did in Hungary. And in Estonia, the Ministry of Environment has shown us data that clearly show that the wolf is in that belt, that forest belt between the inland and the coast. And that's where the wolf is at home. And you see the jackal up below the forest, but not in the coastal region. He somehow doesn't make it through the forest because that's where the wolf is at home. So they have tracked the migration of the jackal within Estonia, and they clearly see some indications, we need the scientific background, that there is a strong interaction between these two species.
I agree. This is an indication, and it fills into the body of evidence. However, it suffers from the same usual problem that we all have when we look into this issue: is how do you separate the effect of land cover from the effect of the carnivore? And this is why I was talking about the importance of looking in the German and Polish case, because there we can tease that apart. But in the case of Romania, certainly from the howling survey that we've done, systematic, it seems that except for the Danube Delta, which is a very different and separate problem, but in southern Romania, the density of jackal, whether in places where they are novel, is actually also lower than what we see in for example, in Bulgaria and Hungary. So there might be other local reasons that explain this pattern in Romania.
Yeah, anyway, it's a great opportunity for research, because it seems that people is ready to jump on the conclusion based on just correlation, not really evidence for causation.
I have a question maybe more for John and potentially also for Luigi or for other experts that have spoken before. We have centered many of these talks on coexistence and on expansion of large carnivores and the good news of seeing them continuing in this more in this distribution. It is more even throughout Europe. So, John or Luigi, would you think the next title of the next similar meeting that we could have in a few years would step on a consideration that also Nathan has done on the presence of jackals? That would be, are we ready not to deal with coexistence, but are we ready to deal with complexity? In terms that the fact that many large carnivores are expanding and now overlapping, and now we see also the presence of a new expanding carnivore, overall figure out a more complex situation where the ecological relationships can happen again in a very articulated manner. So, and on the one side, we would say, are we ready to deal with complexity? And for the experts, are we ready to explain to people what are the advantages of complexity, as refers to a simplified situations where everything is managed and constrained into very clear, physical or theoretical borders, where on the one side we have humans and on the other side we have wildlife.
Could somebody get some pizza? This is going to take a long time. No, in some ways it is a bit of a luxury that we are in this kind of situation, because most of our kind of colleagues in conservation are dealing with kind of really doom and gloom scenarios, right, where they're saving the last individuals, the last population of something, and we're dealing with, well, how do we manage success, right? And we're not in the state of saving the last wolf or the last jackal, but we are learning to how do we build a new relationship with these large mammals. And that's why I think my talk ended with this idea that everything is so complicated, because it's not just saving that last thing over here, but it's trying to learn how are we going to manage very complex interactions across our whole landscape. And I really don't think we are there. We'd struggle to know how are we going to manage the complexity. And it's not just the ecological complexity, it's also the social complexity. And we're in a political time at the moment where it's actually getting harder. I don't see a sort of an increasing focus on tolerance and diversity and understanding at the moment. We're in a political culture of populism and simple answers and kind of anti-science. So I think we're probably getting less and less equipped to actually deal with that new complexity. So I certainly think the coming decades are going to be increasingly conflictful. What will be very interesting will be the CAP reform, because I think that will really be a sort of a process that will determine an awful lot about how the European landscape is going to look in the coming decades. So I think that sort of seemingly bureaucratic process going on is really going to be the determining factor for how the European landscape, with all these interactions, is going to look in 20 years' time. So I think that process is crucial.
I can add that the real challenge to me is how people will be able to handle the evolution of the situation that are evolving very fast, especially with large carnivores. You have seen how fast the wolf population are expanding and increasing. You've seen the jackals, but even human society are changing very fast. The availability of new habitat type for this species change very fast. On the other side, humans are obsessed with static views. That this is a species and that's it. And the species actually, it's a moving window, and people just don't understand that. The issue of hybridization is just the best example. Where a wolf and the dog start, we don't know. And there is not a scientific answer. It's a political, it's a human mind that requires to have categories. This is a hybrid, this is a dog, this is a wolf. But this is bullshit in scientific terms. So this is the real challenge for us. And in a way, I don't want to seem arrogant, but in a way, scientists are more open to handle the evolution, these moving windows. Not always, but human society are not so easy. And the legal framework are the real problem, because they don't change so quickly. And even when we do land use planning, here is a national park, boom. But many of the national parks in Italy should be actually changed. Some should be restricted, some should be enlarged, and we are not able to that. I think that's the real challenge more than complexity. That's my personal view, sorry. Any other question?
I have a question about the golden jackal.
Golden jackal.
Actually, two questions. I come from Bulgaria, and I would like to ask, how did you come to the data of the population size in Bulgaria? And my second question is, you mentioned two cases, or at least cases from two countries, about damages on livestock from jackals. how were these cases proved that they are from jackals? And just to add something shortly, we did genetic analysis on wolf population in Bulgaria together with Polish colleagues, and just by accident we didn't have the target, the jackal, as a target, but we discovered 4 individuals which are hybrids between jackals and wolves.
Very interesting. So first, the population estimations for Bulgaria. This is work done by Stoyan Stoyanov, who is using the hunting bags and age structure in the hunted animals, as well as local estimation of the proportion of the harvest on extant population. I didn't show here, but those come from with very wide confidence intervals. We still have to confront those estimates with actual separate estimates coming from howling survey, which we are starting to accumulate. But given the number of animals that they shoot in Bulgaria, I would say this is rather an underestimate, if anything, and it seems high nevertheless. The second question was for damages. So as I said, in most countries, the damages for jackals aren't reported, and this is certainly the case for Bulgaria in most of the parts. For Slovenia and Estonia, they have actually a very strict protocol where local trained experts go on the site, and they even confirmed, I think in the case of Slovenia, with genetics. And the problem is that we're still lacking experience for jackal, because jackal mortality is not as clear-cut as a lynx mortality is. So we believe that they are robust assessments, but we need to get into the details of those protocols later on. You had another question, if I recall? No, you had a remark. So that is super interesting, and I'll be happy to discuss it more.
I have just remarks. We spoke before about golden jackal. We study the human dimension of jackal in Italy, and we have a big opportunity because jackal have almost no human dimension. So in the contrary of wolf, we don't have people who are afraid or have a lot of legend of the head plant of bullshit about jackal. So this is a good opportunity, but you know that one thing is very dangerous, because people are afraid of what they don't know. So in some area, when some strange things are happening in nature, all the people say, well, since the jackal is here, is because of the jackal. I don't have tomatoes anymore in my garden, we have less birds for jackal. So we are in a hurry, we need data to explain people what jackal is able to do or not, because this black hole of human dimension of jackal, we have to avoid that can be very quick empty with full of bullshit and not of scientific data. So also is an appeal to the colleague. So we need to know more now in Europe about golden jackal, because people are asking this from us. The society is asking this. Thank you.
Totally right. However, the lack of human dimension, I would say, that's the case for Italy, but if you would go today in Hungary, believe me, there is a human dimension about the golden jackal problem. That's how they call it. The ministry is even getting pretty agitated on the subject. So there is a human dimension in some places, but in Italy,
can you bring the microphone up there?
Thank you. I just have a question for the dear Ranc concerning the golden jackal. In a previous chart, you showed that there is a proportional increase of golden jackal density compared to the increase of agriculture, but until the 75%. And I would like to know what is your opinion concerning this event, because I have a theory, but I would like to know your opinion.
Well, I think it's they need a certain degree of forest cover, mostly for reproduction and for day rests, and this is pretty obvious actually. In Vojvodina, the northern part of Serbia, we can see that it's heavily intensified agriculture. Jackals are only present along the rivers, and that's because it's the only place they can find day cover. And certainly the absence of jackals in the plain of the Po in Italy is is confirming this pattern. They need some areas to stay away from mostly human-related mortality. That's what we believe.
Thank you.
Volendo fare un salto a pie pari e saltare praticamente la questione morale, etica, tutto quello che vogliamo e anche i punti di vista, no? Riguardo all'uccisione dei predatori. A me interessava un punto di vista scientifico, cioè fino a che punto la scienza risponde a questa domanda, cioè fino a che punto possiamo gestire una popolazione animale che non solo la gestione venatoria, per dire, degli ungulati si basa su una gestione in base alla quale ricaviamo un interesse in base alla popolazione che lasciamo sul territorio, ma se noi agiamo su una popolazione di predatori per abbatterli al fine del contenimento, sappiamo che non funziona, perché una specie tende ad occupare tutto lo spazio disponibile adatto a quella specie. Ora, se la scienza fino a che punto riesce a dire che l'uccisione serve, voglio dire, per accontentare quell'allevatore che è arrabbiato, per accontentare quel cacciatore che vuole prelevare un capo, oppure se serve in realtà a gestire la specie. Non so se sono riuscito a spiegare.
No, l'ho spiegato benissimo, ma non è una domanda scientifica, giustamente, è una domanda politica. E quindi la scienza non ha una risposta. La scienza può dire l'impatto che ha quel prelievo sulla popolazione dei carnivori e anche probabilmente qualcosa sull'impatto che può avere sulla popolazione di erbivori, ma non ha una risposta sull'effetto garantito o meno sull'opinione dei cacciatori o degli allevatori o quello che sia, certamente, anche perché ci saranno dei pro e dei contro, sicuro, da valutare su un piano che è proprio prettamente politico.
What is the role of human migration in this new colonization?
Do you mean changes in local population density, abandonment of the land? Is that what?
No, if conflict, worldwide conflict, can affect the colonization or migration of animals?
So actually, there is an interesting case. So following the Balkan War, for just an example, come to the top of my head, jackals have been shown to use heavily minefields as a potential, local escape from human persecution. So that's an example in which local conflicts could have an impact, but I think that most of the impacts of conflicts goes on simply changes in human pressure on wildlife, on land use changes and so on. But certainly, I mean, you can see them on the dynamics of the golden jackal and on the wolf through time. You can clearly see the two world wars in the dynamics. So you can definitely have an impact.
Based on the talks today, it became obvious that studying the interaction between wolf and human is a very complex issue. Now we get into Europe more complexity. We get golden jackals, for instance, and there is an interaction between human, wolf, golden jackals. In fact, the interaction is way more complex. There will be an effect on foxes, on other mesopredators. There will be more effects on wildlife, on forests, whatever. If I see what effort is done in some regions of the world, like in American national parks, where we started understanding large predator effects of ecosystems that created valuable scientific outcome, but also some stories probably. At least in Germany, where I'm from, I see no structure, no research that could do long-term ecological research to start understanding what is going on. In most parts of Europe, we are not even able to generate sound census data or assess hybridization or things like this, and ecology is much more complex. Aren't we going into a crisis somehow in the long term? How should we do this research, and who should do that? Shouldn't we start, instead of only funding short-term projects, to set up real structures to do long-term intense studies?
It would be great if we could have a set of study sites. What I think I would like to do, though, which is slightly different from the, say, kind of Yellowstone example, is that kind of the example of kind of Yellowstone is really interesting from a scientific point of view, but it has very little kind of relevance for anything outside, right? Because it's a protected area which is kind of unique. And they may describe what happens there, but that doesn't transfer to almost anywhere else in the whole landscape. So I think if we were going to do this in Europe, it would be really fun to implicitly include the human effect in there as well. Because the people are ecological actors, right? We're changing the habitat, we're changing the predator community, we're acting as a predator, so we influence the herbivore community, we're fertilizing the landscape. So if somehow you could explicitly include the human impact and the animal impact, saying into the same site, then I think it would actually have a relevance way greater than anything that kind of Yellowstone will ever have for the rest of the world. So I would happily support that idea that we set up these kind of long-term sites.
Well, on behalf of the LCIE, I thank you all very much for listening to our stories. And I hope you have understood the complexity of some of the issues we are dealing with. The results of this presentation and of our discussion tomorrow and after tomorrow will produce a number of documents that will be available on our website, www.lcie.org, and you are welcome to download all the data. The maps of distribution that Petra shows and the number of animals of the different species and different populations will also be made available very soon, and you can download everything. So on behalf of LCIE, thank you so much. We thank the whole organization. With this, I pass the microphone for the last goodbye to Francesca and
Insomma, cosa vogliamo dire? È finito questo convegno di 3 giorni massacranti. Grandi chi è riuscito a resistere fino alla fine o chi è arrivato all'ultimo momento. Noi siamo molto entusiasti, siamo sicuri che insomma questa cosa sia riuscita e sia piaciuta a tutti. Grazie e alla prossima.
Alla prossima, sì. Ma come museo, pensando al quel 2012-2013, quando abbiamo deciso di partecipare, 2012, sicuramente è stata un'occasione per imparare molto e penso che abbiamo avuto un'occasione per crescere tutti quanti e creare una serie di relazioni e di esperienze che abbiamo, spero, saputo condividere all'interno del WolfAlps, ma penso poi nella continuità quotidiana del nostro lavorare in natura. E l'occasione è stata grande perché soprattutto ha creato persone nuove, giovani, che riescono ad affrontare il tema della comunicazione, della natura, ma anche della convivenza o condivisione delle varie tematiche. Penso che l'esperienza che Carlo Maiolini ha vissuto e la trasmissione della sua esperienza al gruppo, come quella di Marta che è arrivata dopo, che ha portato con sé l'esperienza di altri WolfAlps, ma di altri LIFE, ma anche l'esperienza dei colleghi del MUSE, Alessandra Pallaveri che è ancora qui con noi, Francesca Rossi e tutti quelli che avete visto in questi giorni aiutarci a realizzare, ma che hanno seguito anche la formazione e il lungo percorso che con Luigi e Francesca e tanti altri abbiamo potuto realizzare per questo incontro finale, sia diciamo uno dei risultati più belli che possiamo, penso, aver avuto modalità e modo di condividere assieme oggi. Penso che parlare di grandi carnivori è stata una gran bella cosa perché sicuramente segna un lungo percorso culturale che ha portato a un ritorno naturale di tante specie o alla citazione di nuove che abbiamo riportato. Questo forse è uno degli elementi più importanti che come società moderna e società che è attenta al bene comune possiamo lasciare al futuro. Io spero che il futuro sia appunto un futuro ancora di dialogo, di condivisione e l'esperienza e la professionalità che tanti di noi hanno messo sia un'esperienza indimenticabile.